Okay. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar titled The Climate Toolkit for Housing and Infrastructure, Applying these Services to Advancing Transport and Climate Priorities. This webinar is part of Transport Canada's Adapting to a Changing Climate webinar series. My name is Suzanne Sealing with the Climate Risk Institute, and I will be the facilitator for today's webinar. I want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory on the traditional lands of Atikamekshin and Anishinaabeg, as well as Wenapatee First Nation. I invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat box if you'd like and include your own land acknowledgement. I will be available during the webinar if you run into audio or technical issues. To ask me a question, open the chat box, use the drop-down arrow, and locate Suzanne Sealing. Then you can send me a private message. Please note that your microphones have been disabled to avoid any audio distractions, but we will provide you an opportunity to ask questions using your microphone during the Q&A session. The dedicated Q&A session will happen at the end of the webinar, but that doesn't mean you have to hold your questions until then. Please feel free to type out your questions during the presentations in the Q&A box. The chat box is also available if you would like to submit comments there. We're recording the webinar today and sending out a link to everyone who has registered. While today's webinar will be held in English, we will share a French version of the presentation slides. You're also welcome to ask your questions in either English or French. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Sherry Young. In her role as Project Director, Climate Insight, Sherry brings a broad perspective of climate mitigation, adaptation, and nature-based solutions to the Climate Insight team at HICC Canada. With 25 years experience in environment and sustainability, having completed her first emissions calculations in 2002, she has worked on land reclamation and restoration, air quality and climate emissions, contributed to global assessments on biodiversity and land degradation, led the first natural asset inventory and valuation project in Alberta, and has advanced sustainability and climate action across sectors, including municipal and provincial government, post-secondary education, and energy companies. Next, we have Annie Lamelis. So in her role as Senior Policy Analyst at Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, Annie has contributed to the development of policies for climate change adaptation and resilience since 2021. She has worked on the Climate Toolkit for Housing and Infrastructure team since its creation in 2023. Before joining HICC, Annie completed a master's and PhD in geography and acquired a wealth of experience in the environmental field, including work in Latin America and the Canadian Arctic. On behalf of everyone joining us, I'd like to warmly welcome Sherry and Annie for presenting this webinar for today. We appreciate it. I will now hand it over to Annie.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you to the Climate Risk Institute and Transport Canada for the organization of this webinar. And I will also mention that I'm joined today by my colleague Olivia, who is managing the behind the scene and technical aspect of this presentation with me. So thank you, Olivia. And I would also like to begin by acknowledging that I am located on unceded Indigenous lands. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and to date is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. Well, I'm pleased to share today the work of our team within Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, HICC. Olivia, you can go to the next slide. So HICC, formerly known as Infrastructure Canada. Our department's overarching mission is to help communities thrive by making public infrastructure more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient to climate change, while improving the affordability and accessibility of housing. So this mission is realized through a wealth of policies, programs, such as the Canada Public Transit Fund, the Active Transportation Fund, and the Rural Transit Solutions Fund, and investments, including in the brand new Climate Toolkit for Housing and Infrastructure that we are presenting today. So we'd like to begin this webinar by learning a bit more about you who are attending to this webinar. So to do this, we invite you to take part in a short poll on the Slido platform. And I will let my colleague Olivia facilitate this part of the webinar. So over to you, Olivia.
Thank you, Annie. I'm just going to send a link in the chat that will take you to our online poll. And while you're filling that out, I will also share my screen so we can see the live results. Okay, so there should be a link and a QR code in the chat. Let me know if you can't access it and I can send it to you directly as well. And now I'm just going to share my screen and we can go through each question just to figure out who's in our audience, who we're chatting with today. All right, so our first question, you can continue answering, but I'll just go through them as we're going. So the first question was, what is your role in infrastructure and climate change? And it looks like the large majority of the population or the audience is a professional in the space, either a planner, an engineer, or an asset manager. However, we do have some decision makers and others, so it's nice to have a little bit of variety. I'll go to the next question. Do you feel that your community or jurisdiction has a good understanding of its climate risks and hazards overall? It looks like most of the group, or I guess half of the group, has advanced knowledge. The rest is limited, moderate, and then there are a few that are just getting started. So it's also great. This presentation is for all levels of knowledge. Hopefully everyone can get a little bit out of what we're sharing today. Next is, what climate risks or hazards are of most concern to your community or communities that you support? And it looks like flooding is the winner here, but also extreme heat and wildfire are concerns as well. Do you feel your community or jurisdiction has a good understanding of its greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption? And it looks like a third of us pretty much have limited knowledge. There is some moderate and advanced knowledge, and then as well some uncertain. So a lot of pretty much split across the board. And do you feel your community or jurisdiction has a good understanding of its infrastructure assets, such as their location and condition? And it's exactly evenly split. This is really cool. So we're at all different levels of understanding and progress in this area. So hopefully we can all learn together today. And do you feel your community or jurisdiction has access to relevant tools and support resources to address climate and infrastructure issues? And it looks like most of us are uncertain. Yep, so that's the end of this slide. We can continue with the rest of the presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate and share. It really helps us a lot to know who we're chatting with.
Exactly. Thank you for participating in the poll. It's very valuable for us to learn more about who we are speaking to, since our services were launched fairly recently, and we are not trying to spread the word as much as possible. So it's really good to know who we are, keeping track of who we are speaking to. So let's now get into the heart of the matter. So through the Climate Toolkit for housing and infrastructure, we support communities with understanding their climate risks and greenhouse gas mitigation opportunities in their public housing and infrastructure projects. Our team serves as a center of expertise within HICC, so Housing Infrastructure Communities Canada to support communities. And as you will see, we also work in close collaboration with HICC Canada and the Canadian Urban Institute in the delivery of the initiative. And as I said, our services were recently launched, so we are in the implementation phase of a 5-year mandate, but really working with a long-term view for infrastructure sustainability. We can go to next slide. No. We know that actions taken at the municipal level have a major impact for both reducing emissions and climate adaptation, notably because they own and manage an increasing share of the public infrastructure. However, to strengthen climate resilience and reduce emissions, communities face several challenges. For example, accessing the right resources and tools. There are many that exist, but how to determine which one apply to our specific situations is not always easy to determine. Obtaining the geospatial data that is needed, for example, for risk analysis is not always readily available. There is a limited access to region-specific expertise, and this expertise can be costly and not accessible to all communities. And municipal staff are often already overburdened with numerous other pressing issues. So climate change is just added something above all their other important challenges. And these are particularly pronounced given that 76% of Canadian municipalities have fewer than 5,000 residents and often lack the resources to tackle climate challenges effectively. Next slide. So the Climate Toolkit supports low carbon resilient infrastructure. We seek alignment between climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies to ensure long-term sustainability in infrastructure planning and implementation. And through this low carbon resilience approach, we aim at having stronger positive outcomes for communities. An example of this low carbon resilience approach is low carbon transportation solutions. So they allow to reduce emissions while improving mobility and air quality. And they also allow to integrate more green infrastructure, such as permeable pavements, tree-lined streets, which help manage urban heat and stormwater. And low carbon transportation can have multiple co-benefits for public health, social equity, and supporting urban biodiversity, for example. So the Climate Toolkit supports the implementation of the National Adaptation Strategy, and it will also contribute to Canada's emission reduction target. We have implemented 3 services to support infrastructure professionals and decision makers from Canadian communities. So first, we have the Climate Help Desk, which is managed internally by one of our team in HICC. The help desk provides direct support and advice to communities looking to integrate climate considerations into their housing or infrastructure projects. Then we have the open access climateinsight.ca platform, which helps communities assess their risks, explore infrastructure options, and access reliable tools and resources. And this platform is developed and delivered by HICC Canada. And finally, we have the roster of climate and infrastructure experts, which connects municipalities with experts who can provide technical guidance for free. So the roster is developed and delivered by the Canadian Urban Institute. And all 3 components are designed to work in close integration to support communities through project development and renewal lifecycle. So the Climate Toolkit supports 4 types of public infrastructure while integrating nature-based solutions. So building and housing development and services in the housing space focus on public housing and for-profit developers and private homeowners are considered more out of scope for the Climate Toolkit services. And then water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, public transit and transportation, and solid waste. So now we will take a closer look at each of the 3 services within the Climate Toolkit for housing and infrastructure, starting with the Climate Help Desk. So the Climate Help Desk is a specialized team that assists communities in addressing high-level climate and infrastructure needs. It serves as an excellent entry point for communities looking to access best practices for integrating emissions reduction and climate resilience measures into infrastructure and housing projects. To receive guidance on using specialized tools and resources to incorporate climate considerations into projects, such as risk assessment tools, and get help in meeting the climate requirements for the different HICC funding programs. There are 3 ways to contact the Climate Help Desk. So through an online web form, by phone, or by email. And I think Olivia already shared this information in the chat. And in the interaction communities have with the Climate Help Desk, they can always expect an answer, a response that is tailored to every inquiry, responses that are in the preferred official language, so English or French, and always a welcoming and professional response. And to give you an idea, I asked my colleague from the Climate Help Desk about inquiries they received related to transportation. And they received several since the beginning of the year, mainly from municipalities and small communities. Most questions received since December were about methods to complete their climate risk assessment, and other were about zero emission buses, asset management, transit, and climate change. And almost all inquiries were related to the Active Transportation Fund, which is a targeted fund under the Canada Public Transit Fund for an intake that closed on February 26th. So communities were seeking support to complete the climate requirements in their application process. So we can head to next slide. So in collaboration with HICC, HICC Canada has developed the Climate Insight platform. It's a website designed to provide access to curated resources and tailored guidance for communities. The platform is updated monthly with new content and twice annually with new features and functions. But I will not say more because we will have a live demonstration of the platform with Sherry in a few minutes. So we can directly go to the third and last service. So the roster of climate and infrastructure experts. So once a community is ready to get into the nitty-gritty of low carbon resilient housing and infrastructure projects, they can access the roster of climate and infrastructure experts, which is also known as the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service. So the roster will allow to the communities to get connected with qualified and pre-vetted climate and infrastructure experts, analyze the best options to develop a climate-informed project with expert support, and develop better infrastructure projects that integrate climate considerations, which lead to longer-lasting infrastructure and housing and longer-term affordability for communities. So it doesn't matter if the project is in the assessment, design, construction, or management phase. The service can provide various options to help the community's project enhance its low carbon and climate resilience. So I will now give the floor to Sherry from HICC Canada to speak a little bit more about the Climate Insight platform.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, we've been working on, my name is Sherry Young, and I'm the project director for Climate Insight, which is, as you see, one of the 3 pillars of the climate tool site. That was a really good overview of the other 2 pillars. But mine, because I did it myself. No, ours, HICC Canada's pillar is a bit more interactive. So I thought it would be easier to explain how it works if I could just walk you all through it. What Climate Insight does is it provides that go-to destination for decision-making support tools, information, and gives you that basic level of information for communities that are looking for information. Our target audience is communities under 500,000. but that's not to say that that communities over 500,000 can't use it. It's not beneficial, or that organizations that support communities in that cohort won't find something useful, because it really is a repository and is of up-to-date information on all of those things. Since we launched in October 2024, so we're having our 6-month anniversary here shortly, and release 2 is coming out April 24th, so watch for that. We have had almost 50,000 page visits for Climate Insight, so it's obviously really meeting a need for some of that research that came ahead of time from HICC. They noticed that there was a gap there, which was the incentive to create this toolkit. On that note, I can share my screen here, and I will walk you through what it looks like. All right, can everybody see my screen? Yes, thumbs up, yes. Annie, does it? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah,
perfect.
It's great, Sherry. Yeah.
Good. Everybody has their cameras off, so it's hard to see. So I wasn't sure. Okay, so this is Climate Insight, climateinsight.ca, or si vous parlez français, c'est perspectiveclimatique.ca. Everything is available in both languages. Since this is a Transport Canada or transportation-based group, I'm going to walk you through with a scenario-based really quickly. So I talk really fast, so apologize, and make sure you get in here and learn it yourself if you're interested at all, or send me an email. We're going to start with the map. So what this is it really is a repository for information. And there's 3 sections. There's a geospatial. So we'll start there first. This guide assist on a project is actually a solutions finder, and asks some questions to help narrow down what you're maybe looking at. And then, of course, there's a library that is the repository for all the content on there. So let's start with the map. Now, I understand that that the people on this call are mostly Ontario-based. I am in Mohkinstsis or Calgary, out in, and this is resources for communities across Canada, northern, both coasts, prairies, everywhere. But we're going to focus our search today on a community in Ontario. So what you do here is you first can click on the map, and it'll zoom in to your community. Now, this base layer on the map here, I'll just scroll a little bit so you can see. This base layer on the map shows you the social vulnerability rating of the different communities or different neighborhoods in your community based on the dissemination area. Over here, you can see that there are 3 buttons here. This first button talks about climate and socioeconomic layers that we have on the map. So we're right now showing climate layers for the baseline time period, which is 1971 to 2001. But if we want to project it into the future, we can do that. We saw from the Slido earlier that most people are concerned about flooding. So let's use our climate proxy for flooding, which is maximum 1-day precipitation. All this data is pulled from climatedata.ca. And we can see that that Newmarket area has, a fair amount of precipitation that, or like a pretty high level of maximum 1-day precipitations in about maybe 70 millimeters, right? So we do know that flooding is an issue. Now, if we want to combine that with the social vulnerability layer that we saw earlier, we click here, and some of this functionality is going to improve with release 2. There will be more breakdowns and things like that. But now we can see what we can see here is that in the Newmarket area, some of these areas have are already pre-existing social vulnerability factors and flooding factors. So the more purple on the side here, there's a legend. The more purple the color of the dissemination area, the more people are exposed to both climate flooding and social vulnerability factors. So this area over here looks like it has a higher density of people who have pre-existing social factors and higher pre-existing factors, and also climate hazards. Sorry, I was distracted. I saw a comment come in. You could only do 1 layer at a time. We've combined them in bivariate layers, so that's how that's working right now. Just to answer the question in the chat. If you click over here, though, you can add an infrastructure layer. So currently, the active infrastructure layer is pedestrians and cycling. This is a transportation group. You could also look at bridges and tunnels. Right now, we in this version, we only have access to the provincial bridges and tunnels that are on there. There will be an improved database based on the ODI coming in our next release. Or say you're interested, I heard that Annie said people are asking about zero emissions transit and things like that, you can look at see where your transit stops are here. And maybe because we're worried about flooding and we're worried about transportation, we see that there's a number of transit stops in this area. We want to make sure that we're focusing on the transportation or the roads that surround this transit stop, because it's catering to an area where people are at higher risk, both from flooding and pre-existing social factors. So knowing that gives you a little snapshot of your impacts or your vulnerability to climate hazards. That helps you kind of maybe focus your next project. So you don't know where to focus your project. You can then say, okay, I'm going to look at flooding risk for public transportation or roads, and we'll go back to our solutions finder. So the solutions finder will ask you a series of questions. We are theoretical project is Ontario. I'm not sure what the population of Newmarket is, but I'm going to guess we're going to put it, I should have looked that up. I think it's kind of large. If we already understand kind of the solutions and the ideas around climate infrastructure, we can go right to these options. But if we want some more information, I can show you right here. Oh, 92,000, good guess. Okay, thank you. You can find out more information about how climate risks impact your facilities, how life cycle emissions, how to integrate considerations around that, how to integrate equity. We already looked at the map a little bit, some of the costs of climate change and nature-based solutions. So if you need an overall view of that, you can take a look there. But right now we're focusing on mitigation options or adaptation options for, I don't think it's rural, remote, northern, or indigenous, because I know where Newmarket is. And it's pretty big, so that's not any of those. But if your community were those, it'll help streamline your answers. In the next iteration, we're looking at adaptation, we're looking at flooding, we're looking at overland flooding, because that was the proxy that we used, and we're looking at asset class transportation. So what this is we're looking at existing infrastructure that's there, maybe single asset or maybe similar assets in many locations, because we're looking at roads around public transit. And maybe we want to look at what we can do to the actual road itself. Maybe we want to look at what we could do in the area to protect the road, or maybe we want to apply it to the whole neighborhood. I'm going to choose all of these because I'm not sure what the best option is for those roads in the neighborhood. Maybe we have too many underground utilities, so we can't really do anything below ground. Maybe we just have to work on stuff above ground, or maybe we're not really sure. So we can look at all solutions, and then we can categorize them by the level of time, or how much time we need to action. If we know that flooding is an issue now, then maybe we want to do something immediately or within the next 5 or 10 years. So I'm going to choose medium term because it'll come up with more options, just to show how. And then you get a list of options, infrastructure options to apply to flooding on transportation. Obviously, you can input, people familiar with transportation and roads know that you can put a culvert in, you can put some dikes or levees to block off or divert water away. There's drainage ditches. If you have some transportation equipment, lights and other things, elevate them above the flood level. Elevated transit corridors. This gives you a series of options to apply to those infrastructure types that you can then take potentially. If you're a community under 30,000, you could take this list to the expert roster and say, hey, we have transportation issues in our community. I have a list of these. Can you help me design a program, or can you help me narrow this down and see where I need to implement this? And they will assign you an expert roster that knows about transportation and helps you start the conversation around this. So that's your very quick overview of how Climate Insight works. Again, some of this functionality is going to improve next month with our next release. You will be able to create a profile and save these options. Right now, you have to you just click and save this, the direct link here. It's a unique link, but next time you can kind of put it in your little portfolio within your login and save function. There's more options coming, some nature-based solutions and other options. And as well, there's some improved functionality in map layers with the next release, April 24th. So yeah, that's my very quick overview. I encourage everybody to poke around if you haven't already, because as Annie said, this is a 5-year program. We have 4 more years to keep developing it and improving it. We are doing new releases every 6 months for the next 4 years. And so if there's something on here that you think could be really valuable or is really valuable now, but could be improved to make it more useful for your community, then we are absolutely focused on improvements through our municipal advisory group, which is our users and target audience, and based on customer feedback or user feedback, because we want to make sure this tool is fit for purpose and meets those gaps that that communities across Canada need for their climate and infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Sherry. So Olivia will put her screen up again. So with these 3 services that are available, communities might be wondering like where they should start. So communities can access the services depending on what they need. There is no precise order to reach to one of the services. With the Climate Help Desk, communities can get support from HICC advisors on climate resources and tools specific to their project, and help to go through the climate requirements in the different funding programs. With climateinsight.ca, as you just saw, communities can explore climate hazards and infrastructure that may be impacted while learning about the social equity implications. And there are many resources on this platform that you can explore. And when a community is ready to take the next step with a project and, for example, conduct a risk assessment or implement low carbon resilient infrastructure, they can access the roster of climate and infrastructure experts. So here they can get connected with experts who can provide technical support with getting projects climate ready for free. So we can head to the next slide. So this was for the presentation part. We will welcome any questions from the audience, from the participants. If you have any question yet, don't hesitate to ask them. We did put down this question for you. How do you see the Climate Toolkit services helping you and your stakeholders and partners or communities you are working with? So I will turn back to Susan to facilitate this question and answer period. And thank you for listening and being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Thanks, Sherry, and Olivia, of course. Really informative presentation and tour of the platform. We do have a good amount of time to ask questions and even just comment on what your reflections or thoughts are on the tool. We're a small number, so if you'd like, you can use your microphone to ask your question. To do this, on the bottom panel, there's a react icon. If you click that, you can raise your hand, and then I will unmute you. You can also, of course, enter them in the chat box or the Q&A box.
If there's anything anyone wants to see closer on the Climate Insight, or if you have questions on any part of the toolkit, what we've done to date, I'm happy to zoom in on some of that because it was a very quick zoom through. There's mitigation, a whole mitigation pathway as well. So.
Okay, yeah. Would you like to raise your hand? You'll have to raise your hand, whoever wrote that. There we go. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, it's Gabriela here, not Susan. So I was happily surprised by this Climate Insight site, and was kind of quickly, but I understand you, Sherry, you have to go quickly, but you share the climate and socioeconomic maps, but after that you changes to infrastructure, and I'm not sure how you play with that. I don't know if you can share again your screen and show it, or maybe this is too specific, but I really like your map.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for the question and thanks for the interest. Yeah, the map itself. So I'm just gonna, can you see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the map itself, I know I went really fast. The map itself has been is kind of one of the most popular parts of the Climate Insight. It's been one of our top places, that and the Solutions Finder in combination, so that people can see it from our analytics. So can you see where my mouse is, Gabriella?
Yes.
Yeah, so this first layer, this button here with the cloud on it,
Yeah.
right? So climate socioeconomic. To switch the infrastructure layer, it's the buildings one.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Thank
I
you.
went really quickly. And to
Sorry.
change the timeline there. So then you can choose your different infrastructure layers. And this will, we're adding a couple extra infrastructure layers to this one. Here we're getting some low carbon energy, low carbon energy, which was added to the ODI for this year. And also when we looked at the data, a whole lot more communities are now included on the ODI, in the ODI, which is the open database of infrastructure where we're pulling this data from. So if you don't see, for example, if you don't see, we noticed that there's not a lot of information on potable water, but there are way more data points on that in the next go round. So if you can click on the different kinds of infrastructure here, and you'll see way more data and way more communities represented in the next.
Okay, thank you. And just a little comment is that would be super nice to have more than one, that we can choose more than one layer, but maybe it's complicated.
Yeah, no, we've heard that a few times. It's hard to put multiple climate layers on at the same time because it's hard to put like a heat layer on top of a flooding layer without making it an index, right? Because it's not the same, and it's also not the same amount of impact, right? Your flooding will have a different impact than a heat layer, for example. So, but that was what we did for these bivariate layers. So these days where we combine the social vulnerability with the actual hazard itself is how we kind of got around that. So we could do two layers at the same time. And we can't currently do, because of functionality, multiple infrastructure layers, but it's pretty easy to switch through the different layers.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Yep.
Thanks for your question. We have another question that came through. Have you considered including certified projects as best practices in order to use as a model? For example, Envision.
Is that question for me? Am I still sharing my?
Yeah, you are. So
what I didn't touch on is some of these tools that we feature in our program. So on Climate Insight, we have, this is the Learn and Understand section that I touched on briefly. Now, if you want to learn and understand about infrastructure projects, Envision is a tool that you can use for infrastructure and sustainability and to guide your projects. So in this life cycle emissions piece where you're learning what emissions mean and where they can be as in part of your project, there's this other, you could either do a baseline emissions assessment that is built in for our project, and we are working on building in other kinds of built-in tools as well. But the other thing we can do where you will find Envision is if you're looking for other kinds of life cycle emissions tools other than a baseline calculator. So potentially you could answer some questions in here that will generate, again, this is another thing to support what kind of tool you're looking for. I'm just going to, I can't remember which level of complexity Envision is, but if you have access to your energy bills, maybe you don't, maybe you have different kinds of data and you want to look at, I think that we put it under life cycle analysis, but you'll get a list of tools here. Now Envision didn't turn up in this one. I can't remember how I've tagged that one, but you'll get a list of tools you can use in that are recommended. And in each of these, it'll tell you how the tool works, what are some of the asset classes it applies to, some of the considerations, and then it has a link to the tool itself, like whether it costs any money, things you need to know, how long it takes to complete it, and then you can have a link directly to the tool itself. So I know Envision is in our database. I just can't remember what I tagged it under because I went really quickly, and where it applies. So yes, is my long answer to that question.
And also, because our target audience is like smaller communities, most at-risk communities, and if they explore the Climate Insight platform and they end up with a list of recommended tools and options, and they have questions about those, they can always reach the climate help desk to have more explanation and make sure they are like going to the right tool. And in their responses to the inquiries, the climate help desk also often provides some case studies and information on best practices to really help the communities like have all the information they need to go forward with their infrastructure and housing projects.
Thanks, both. We did have a comment from Chris. He's with NRCan, so he's involved in facilitating the adaptation platform working group for energy. And the group has stakeholders from energy utility companies, municipalities, provincial territorial representatives, and some associations. And Chris just comments that he thinks the working group would be very interested in what was presented today, if that's something of interest, and you can connect.
Sure.
Yeah. Annie and I have a roadshow. We'll do it.
Great. Did you leave your email addresses on the last slide? We can put the contact in the chat box there if that would help.
We can include this information in the follow-up email that will be sent to all the participants as well.
Great idea. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Good. We still have time for more questions and answers.
I can speak to the slide that is showing now. So if you want to take action after this webinar, there are a few practical next steps that can be taken. If you have an infrastructure project or climate hazard in mind, or if you are seeking for some more information, don't hesitate to reach to our climate help desk. Take some time to explore the Climate Insight platform and learn about infrastructure response options through the Solutions Explorer. And probably the one that applies the most to today's audience, don't hesitate to promote the Climate Toolkit services to your networks and colleagues who are working on infrastructure projects. So yeah, we are, as I said, really looking to increase uptake and spread the word about these new services. So we welcome opportunities to present and share the information.
Yeah, I see the question from Samu there about the Social Vulnerability Index. We're using the Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivations, which we've imported that's available online through StatsCan and those kind of things. So for more information on that, you can Google the Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivations, or come on to Climate Insight and go and click on Data and Methodologies, and it'll tell you where all our information is coming from. We didn't conduct that research, but we did make sure that we used a publicly available data set. So.
Is there somewhere on the website that provides more information about the index? And
absolutely, here, I'll share the screen. And if you're ever looking for more information, you can scroll down to the bottom here, which shows our data sources and methodologies, which shows climate data, emission scenarios, time horizons, explains how that goes, where the infrastructure data comes from, where the equity data comes from, and how the bivariate layers work. And this is, again, going to be updated with more bivariate layers in the next go round. Not a problem. Thanks for that. So the one thing I think that we don't have, the one member of our toolkit that's not here right now is the CRIS program, the expert roster, and they are, because they're madly working to get enough communities, enough projects up by the end of March. They're in their build mode, which I remember when we were approaching our launch date, which was in October. If you have a community or a project that, and you're a community under 30,000, or you know a community under 30,000 has projects or needs some support, they are definitely looking for more projects on that. And that expert roster funded by HICC gives you a certain amount of hours free. It's a funded program by HICC. All of these are funded programs. None of it has any cost to participate. So if you're under 30,000, you need some extra support. It's a pretty easy. Oh, actually, I'll share my screen really quickly again. You can go to the support page here. This is, if you have questions on funding programs and things like that, you could go to the Climate Help Desk, which takes you to the HICC Help Desk. If you have any questions on anything you found, any of the content you found on Solutions Finder, if it falls into the HICC infrastructure portfolio, they can answer those questions. Or you can click here and it'll take you to, am I sharing this screen now? Empowering Communities. Can we see this, Chris?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And there's a quick and easy registration format here. So since they aren't here, I thought I'd give them a bit of a plug because they're working hard too to get this program off the ground and customized for people. So if you go on Climate Insight and you find some options or some tools and you want some more information, you need some help and you're under 30,000, I recommend taking that information, going straight to the CRIS program, and they've got lots of a huge number of experts on their roster that they can match you up with an expert and help you with those.
We did receive one question during the registration process. So someone asked, what if a community doesn't have a dedicated climate specialist? What do users do after getting a list of options or tools from Climate Insight?
Well, I don't know. My stuff ends at Climate Insight. I'm just kidding. That's what the other two tools are for, right? So that's the CRIS. You can go to them. If you don't know what to do with the options, you can call the help desk. As Annie was saying, they've had lots of different inquiries. They can give you information on programs available and more details on what's covered under the Infrastructure Canada or the Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada umbrella. And how that fits into your municipalities or your communities projects.
Are there any last burning questions for the presenters today? Okay. Hey, well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We do hope you found this webinar informative. And thanks to our presenters, Sherry and Annie. Also thanks to Arif Hussein at Transport Canada for helping to coordinate this event. Are there any final remarks from the presenters?
No, thank you for attending, and we will follow up with an email with all of you soon with all the links and information for potential next steps. So thank you, Suzanne, and thank you Transport Canada as well for organizing this opportunity.
Yep, and ditto for me. Thank you so much to everybody for being on here. We are super based on user feedback, so use it, try to break it, find out what's missing, and email us suggestions. If you find something that's really working for you, we're always happy to get testimonials and say, Samu, if you want to send that to me in a testimonial, I'd love that, because we want to make sure we're reaching all of our target audiences. So we have working groups and we have content development groups. So if you're also interested in helping guide the development over the next few years, please let us know.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks
Suzanne.
everyone. Yeah, have a great rest of your day.